This conference will now be recorded.
So yesterday we were discussing about what is PV and what is PVC, persistent value and persistent value claim. How many ways we can provision persistent values? There are two ways. One is static value and second one is dynamic value. So dynamic value, suppose someone is trying to claim a PVC. Someone is trying to claim a PVC. Someone is looking for a value by creating a PVC request, persistent value claim. So if we already have a values available in the Kubernetes, the PVC will get the PV. But if the values are not available for that claim in the Kubernetes, it will create. But as of now, in our cluster, is it getting created? Yesterday I created a PVC without PV. Do we got a PV automatically? No. Why? Why we didn't get a PV automatically? Why we are not getting dynamic? Not because of type mismatch. Not because of type mismatch. Let me show you. Who is going to provision the PV dynamically? Who is going to provision the volume dynamically? Storage class. In our Kubernetes cluster, do we have a storage class configured by default? Do we have any storage class, any provisioner which will provision the value? Let me show that. Let me delete everything and let me show you. Let me delete the deployment first. From the scratch, I will show you. I deleted deployment. Deployment will delete the pods, whatever pods which is allocated. But now, do I have a still PVC and a PV which we created yesterday? Now let me delete everything. Let me delete PVC also. Guys, there is a reclaim policy. Since I am trying to explain PVC, there is a reclaim policies. If you see, PV has a reclaim policy. We have some reclaim policies. Persistent value, the way you have a access modes, it has a reclaim policies, right? We have some reclaim policies. What are those reclaim policies? PV will have some reclaim policies. What are those basically? We have retain, recycle, and delete. Retain. When we delete PVC, right? When we delete PVC, associated PV will not be deleted. Associated, whatever PV which got bounded will not be deleted. If you see, now I have a PV. What is this PV reclaim policy? This one, retain. And this PV, do you see, is it associated with this claim? this PV, this value, do you see, is it bounded with this claim PVC? And also you can see vice versa. You can see this is PVC. Do you see that PVC is bounded with this PV? When I see the PVC also, I can see to which PV it got bounded. This PVC is associated with this PV. Right? Now this PV, the reclaim policy is retained. So when I delete this PVC, since the reclaim policy is retained, will it delete the PV? Will it delete this PV? If the reclaim policy is retained, it will not delete. Suppose if it is delete, if the reclaim policy is delete, when we delete PVC, what will happen to the associated PV? Associated PV will also be deleted. Will also be deleted. So we have some reclaim policies. These are some important interview questions. In the interview also they'll ask. You see, persistent volumes, there are two types, dynamic volumes, static volumes. If we have a storage class configured, we will get a value if it is not already available to claim. But since we don't have a storage class configured in this cluster, are we getting the dynamic volumes? I mean to say, when we are requesting for a value, if it is not available, when we are claiming the value, if the value is not available, are we getting the value? As of now, no. That is because we don't have a storage class configured. In that case, we need to manually create the values. And we have a volume claim policies, right? Persistent volume claims, we are going to get a value with the help of claim. And a claim has a policies like retain, recycle, and delete. When PVC is deleted, in case of retain, when PVC is deleted, the PV will still exist. The PV will still exist. The volume is considered as released, but it is not going to be available for another claim. It is not going to be available for another claim because the previous claim data will be still there, right? So it is not going to be available for the another claim. Manually, Kubernetes administrator has to reclaim. What is the meaning of recycle? Recycle in the sense, when the claim is deleted, value will still exist, but it will perform scrub. I mean to say, it is going to delete the data, whatever data we have in that value, so that it will be available for another claim. Recycling, right? If the claim policy, I mean to say the value claim policy is recycle, when we delete the PVC, when we delete the claim, volume will still exist, but the data in the volume will be deleted, so that it will be available for another claim. So delete, it is simple and straightforward. If the claim policy is delete, when the claim is deleted, what will happen? If the claim is deleted, if the claim policy, that recycle policy, the claim policy, that reclaim policy is delete. When we delete the PVC, what will happen? PV also will gets deleted. So let me delete a PVC. I will show from the scratch. Let me delete a PVC. Delete PVC. Now if you see, I deleted a PVC. Guys, if there is any pod which is using that PVC, before deleting the pod, if I delete the PVC, will it gets deleted? Suppose this PVC is used in any of the application, any of the pod. If the pod is still running, that controller is still running, can I delete the PVC? No, we can't delete. So now I deleted a PVC. Do you see still PV is there? Now let me delete this PV also. Now I don't have PV except this one. Now let me delete. Now I don't have any values. I don't have any values available. Now this is my application. This is my application. This is my application. This is my application. I am creating a claim. I am just creating a claim PVC, and I am using that PVC as a value. Now, since we don't have a storage class configured, will I get a PV automatically if I just create a PVC if the value doesn't exist? No. Now, in this case, will the pod will go to scheduled state? Pod will be in a pending state because we are using, pod is using PVC. PVC is waiting for a PV. So we don't have a storage class. Let me show that. But before creating a PVC, if I have a PVs created already, and I have a PV with this access mode with this much capacity, right? In that case, will it able to claim before deploying this application? If I already have a PVs created, persistent values created, if I have a persistent value with this access mode and this storage capacity, and also that should be already available, right? If that PVC is if that PV is already used by some other PVC, will I able to again claim? Can two PVCs use the same PV? No, right? So the volume should be available. Now let me create. So this storage class you can give manual or you can leave it. Now I'm creating first PV as a Kubernetes administrator. Now, do I have a PV which is available with this access mode? Now, any of the application requires a value now with this access mode, with this much or lesser than this much capacity. Will it claim this value? Any application is trying to create a claim with this access mode and this much capacity, or it can be less than also, but cannot be greater than. Now, this application is creating a claim object. That claim is used in this pod. Now let me apply this one. Now PVC got created. Now if you see this PVC, since I already have a value, do you see it is associated with that PV? I already have a value. The moment I created a PVC, do you see it is associated with that PV? Now, Will my pod will be using that value? Right? So this is how it works. But my question here is, if I don't have a storage class configured and if I don't have a value, whenever if someone is claiming, will values will be created? If I don't have a storage class configured, no. That is dynamic values, right? So I'll try to demonstrate dynamic volume also now. I'll try to demonstrate dynamic volumes also now. Storage class, Kubernetes values. There is a concept called storage classes, right? As a Kubernetes administrator, I can set up a storage class. I can configure a provisioner. I can set up a storage class in the cluster so that whenever someone requires a value, they will create a claim so that storage class will create the value if the values are not available. Right? Storage class. So what is storage class? Storage class provides a way for administrator to describe what type of storage they offer. Storage class is a way for Kubernetes administrator to describe what type of storage it offers. Right? It is a code. It is a code, some provisioner. Storage class contains the fields called provisioner. What type of provisioner? What type of storage it is going to offer? I can create a storage class of this way. API version is this one. Kind is storage class. Provisioner is this one. So if this is the storage class configured, this as a provisioner, what type of values it will create whenever someone requests a PVC? If there is no PV, what type of value it will create based on this provisioner? EBS values, right? Similarly, there are a lot of provisioners. There are a lot of storage classes, right? If you see, in case of Azure Kubernetes cluster, if this is the storage class and this is the provisioner, what type of storage, what type of value will be created? Azure file, right? So whenever we deploy managed Kubernetes clusters, suppose if we have a EKS cluster, if I created a EKS cluster, if we create a EKS cluster, do I need to manually set up this storage class or will I get the storage class automatically? Suppose if I set up EKS cluster, by default, if we create a EKS cluster, by default, EBS storage class will be there, will be configured. In that case, do I need to explicitly create a storage class? Do I need to explicitly configure? In case of EKS, by default, we have a EBS. So EFS storage class, someone was asking Siddharth, right? EFS storage class. So here, if you see, these are the plugins it is coming. You need to write your own code, EFS storage class, right? So there will be a community, right? You can see we need to create some driver, some custom driver, something like this. AWS has provided the documentation. So this storage class, right? They have given how to do these things and what and all prerequisite for this one, right? So using this Helm repo, they are installing that storage class. There is a storage provision, but by default, it is not coming. Okay. So you need to do some settings. You need to configure some settings to set up the EFS storage class. It is specific to AWS. But EBS by default you will get. By default EBS storage class you will get when you set up a EKS cluster. Now, generally what storage class we will use in real time? That depends on your requirement. Suppose I want to have a shared file system. I mean to say I need to mount multiple pods, the same storage. The data should reflect in all the pods shared storage. In that case, what type of volume? If I use EBS kind of a storages, will it work? No. In that case, you need to go for a EFS or NFS kind of a storages. But my requirement is I don't want to share my data with other pods. In that case, EBS, right? That depends on your requirement. Now, this is not a managed Kubernetes cluster. This is not a managed Kubernetes cluster. So do we have a storage class configured by default? No. Here, I need to set up my own storage class. I need to set up my own storage class, right? So in that case, we can set up some storage class like NFS provisioner. So let me show you, right? I will create a storage class with NFS provisioner. So in that case, whenever I am requesting a value, if the value doesn't exist, what type of storage, what type of value it will create if I configure NFS provisioner? What type of value it will create? NFS value. So we are going to deploy that NFS provisioner. So using this manifest, we are trying to provision that NFS value. So I will explain this concept, what we are doing here. So what are we trying to do here? What kind of Kubernetes object we are deploying here? The storage class. Storage class. And this is the storage class name. This is the storage class name. And provisioner. What is the provisioner? Name I am using here? NFS provisioner. So we don't have, we will not get this default provisioner in our Kubernetes, right? So with this name, with this NFS provisioner, what we are trying to do is basically we are deploying one application, we are deploying one image, we are deploying one container using this image, NFS provisioner. Using this Docker image, we are deploying something. So whenever we are creating a value, PVC, if the PV doesn't exist, this is the provisioner. In the background, who will create the value? In the background, this container, basically, this provisioner will create the value. Dynamically, it will create a PV. So I am configuring a storage class, NFS provisioner. So I am deploying one image which will take care of creating the values. This NFS provisioner. Now, if you see, we need to do some important things. The provisioner name, whatever name I have given here, that is this name. Whatever name, provisioner name I have given here, that name I am passing as an environment variable while creating this deployment. And also, what is this IP address? When you are applying this YML for practicing purpose, what is this IP address? You need to change this IP address. What is this IP address? NFS server IP. And what is this path? What is this NFS path here and here we have given? So yesterday, did I created NFS server with this path? shared directory. No, it is different. NFS underscore share. Here also NFS underscore share, and IP also I will update. Before you are also applying, change this. Now, sir, what is this? You are creating lot of objects. You see there is a one more object called service account, cluster role binding. What is this? Right? So I will explain this in a separate class. There is a concept called RBAC. RBAC. There is a concept called RBAC. What is the full form of RBAC? Role based access control. Using RBAC, we can define who can do what in Kubernetes cluster. Permissions, basically permissions to the Kubernetes objects. Who can do what? So if you see here, if you see this manifest file, right? Here I am creating one service account, kind of a functional user. I am creating one service account, and here I am defining some permissions. If you see persistent values, for Kubernetes objects, I am giving a permissions. Like in AWS, how do you manage the permissions to the AWS resources like EC2, EBS, VPC? How are you managing permissions to VPC, EC2? In AWS, what concept we used? IAM, right? So similarly in Kubernetes, there is a concept called RBAC. Using RBAC, I can manage the permissions for Kubernetes resources. Can I call persistent values as a Kubernetes resource? Can I call pod as a Kubernetes resource? Can I call deployment as a Kubernetes resource? Right? So for Kubernetes resources, we can manage the permissions using RBAC. Now, if you see, I'm creating one role. For this resource, I'm giving all the permissions because this application, this container, does it has to create the values dynamically? I mean to say programmatically. This application has to create the values dynamically, programmatically, right? Suppose if this application doesn't have a permissions to create values, will it able to create? No. So that's why we are giving permissions to this application. If you see, we are mapping one service account. It is like you are attaching a role to server, right? Similarly, in Kubernetes, we are attaching one service account to this application, this container, this pod. So this service account, we created that service account and we created a role with some permissions. And here in this object, what we are doing, we are linking that service account with this role. We are linking this service account with this role here using role binding. Then we are using this service account. We are attaching that service account to this pod. So will this container will have a permissions based on whatever role we attach to this service account, whatever permissions we have given? Yes. So RBAC is a way to define who can do what in a Kubernetes cluster, permissions, right? We will discuss in detail later in a separate session. But now, did you guys clear why we are creating all these things for this application? But if you see, for our own applications, why we are not giving any role service accounts? Because is our applications are internally, is it talking to the API server? I mean to say, is it going to create any Kubernetes objects? Our own applications. Programmatically, are we creating any Kubernetes objects from our own code? No. So our own application, does it require to talk to API server to manage any Kubernetes objects? No. That's why we no need to give any service account. But this is internal application. Is it a end user application? Whatever application I am deploying here, is it an end user? It is internal application. What is the purpose of this application? What is the purpose of this application? To create the values dynamically. To create a values dynamically. So to create a value, does it request to talk to API server to create a value? Yes. So if it requires to talk to API server without having a permissions, will it able to create the values? No. So that is why we are creating service account and all this role. Without creating these things, if I deploy only the deployment and storage class, will it work? Will it able to create the values even though I deploy this provisioner? No. So now let's deploy this one, the complete YAML. So you can do this way also. You can do this way. You curl that file. You curl that file to NFS, something like this, provisioner. This raw content, completely raw content. Don't curl this one. You will not get as is. You click on this raw. You curl this one and create one file. Now you update that file, NFS provisioner. What needs to be updated importantly here? The server IP and whatever directory you have created, and your NFS server IP. It has, it is there in two places. You make sure you update here as well as here. Now let me apply this storage, that provisioner. Now it has created required objects. Now this time, do I have a storage class? Since I created a storage class, do you see a storage class? And also I can mark some of the storage class as a default storage class. If you see here, the storage class, is it default? I'm giving it as a true. So now this storage class is marked as a default storage class. Can I have a multiple storage classes also configured? Like EBS, CFS, provisioners, right? Yes. We can mark one of the storage class as a default, if someone is creating a PVC without mentioning the storage class. If someone is creating a PVC without mentioning the storage class name, so it will use which storage class to create the value? If someone is creating a claim without mentioning the storage class, which storage class it will use? Default. So now I have marked this as a default storage class. Now let me delete. This time I am not going to create a PV, manually. So while creating itself, you need to mention this reclaim policy, right? While creating a storage class, you have an option to change the storage, that reclaim policy. So here I have set, by default, what is the storage, reclaim policy it will take if you are creating a storage class. I have not given anything. What is the storage, reclaim policy it has taken for the storage class? Delete. So that is the default, reclaim policy for a storage class. So let me delete this. If you want to change this one, you can change while creating a storage class. But most of the dynamic values, the reclaim policy will be delete. So now let me delete everything. Let me delete and let me show from the scratch. Why we don't have kubectl delete deployment, the deployment name. Now let me show you. Let me delete this time. Let me delete PVC also. And let me delete PV also. I don't have any PV also now. Now I'm deploying this application, same application. But this time, if you see, I don't have a PV, right? I'm just creating a PVC. I'm just creating a PVC. I'm just creating a PVC. And in my PVC also, I have not mentioned the storage class name. If required, I can mention the storage class name, from which storage class it has to use the value. I have not mentioned that storage class name also. Now, I'm just creating a PVC. This time, will the PV will also get created? Ruban Kumar is saying no. Because this storage class, do I have a storage class configured? This time, Ruban. And since I created a storage class and also I have configured that as a default storage class, even though in my claim, if I don't mention the storage class name, using which storage class value will be created if it is not going to exist? Whatever is marked as default. Now, will I get a value? Now I'm just creating a PVC. I don't have a PV. Now if I deploy this application, I am just creating a PVC and I am using that PVC in my pod. Now if you see, PVC got created. And what about this one? Who created this value? You see, the value also got created. Who created this value? If you see, the storage class. The storage class, dynamic values. This is, we call it as a dynamic values. Now, whatever application requires, but in PVC, you cannot mention the reclaim policy. That is bounded with your PV. The reclaim policies are bounded with your PV, not in the PVC. In PVC, you cannot say reclaim policy, delete or retain, right? It is bounded with the PV only. So this PV is created with reclaim policy as delete. Why? Because in the storage class, what was the reclaim policy? The storage class configured with what reclaim policy? Delete. So who created this value? Who created this value? Storage class. So storage class has created a value with which reclaim policy? Delete. So PVC, you don't have a reclaim policies. In PVC, you cannot mention reclaim policy. Only in PV. But when you delete a PVC, whatever associated PV, if that PV reclaim policy is delete, what does it mean? When I delete this PVC, will the PV also will get deleted? That is the meaning of it. Now, suppose I want to deploy one more application. I want to deploy one more application, maybe Jenkins application. Jenkins application. Swati is trying now itself. Take your own time and see, because you might have done some mistakes. Okay, you might have not given properly that NFS IP addresses, or your NFS server might be stopped. Right? Take your own time and do it, not while while discussing the class itself. So now this pod is using what type of value? Sorry, dynamic only, but I mean to say what type of storage it is using. NFS storage. So whenever people are deploying the application, do they need to worry about what type of storage this Kubernetes cluster is offering? As a as a developer, I am deploying one application. I just need a value. Does it matters for me what type of storage Kubernetes is providing? I just need a storage, that's it. In our pod manifest, since we are using PVC concept, does it matter for whoever is deploying, like what type of storage I am going to get? No. So Kubernetes will take care based on the storage class, based on the values. Right? Now, if I go and check in my NFS server, guys, are you going to delete the PVs every time whenever you are going to deploy? Whenever there is a change in your application, are you going to delete PV? Are you going to delete PVC? No. You are going to just delete your deployment. You will recreate the deployment. Now, if you see, not kubectl here. Now, what is this directory? Who created this directory and what is there in that directory? Within this shared directory, I see one more directory. What is this? And which? And whatever I see in this folder, what is this data? Who has written this data inside this one? If you see there, the folder is created with some naming standards. What is this default? What is this? Basically, this is the namespace name, not service account. This is the namespace name, default namespace. And what is this Mongo PVC? The claim name, whatever claim we used, right? Whatever claim, the PVC name, and some random number. So this data is basically this volume data, this volume, this is the volume name, right? So that data. Now can I use, like, if I want to deploy one more application, let's take, I want to deploy Jenkins image. I want to run Jenkins also as a Kubernetes pod. If required, I can run Jenkins image, right, in the Docker Hub. Now, if I create a Jenkins, if I don't use volumes, if the Jenkins pod is deleted and recreated, whatever deployments, whatever configurations, whatever jobs we have created, will it be available if the Jenkins pod is deleted and recreated? No. In that case, how can I retain the state of the Jenkins image? I mean to say Jenkins pod. What concept I have to use? Again, value, right? That volume can be persistent value. So while deploying this image, while deploying this image, while deploying this image, I can create a deployment or stateful set, right? I can deploy, stateful set, or I can deploy as a deployment that Jenkins image. And if I need a value, can I use claim, volume claim? Let me do this, right? API version v1 kind. For now, I am using deployment. But what is the recommended way to deploy stateful applications? Stateful set. I'll explain today what is stateful set. Okay. Name, let me give anything. Jenkins deployment spec. I'm saying replica. So only one replica of Jenkins I need. Then selector, match labels, app Jenkins template. The API version is app/v1. I will update. Template, metadata, name, Jenkins pod, something like this. Labels, app Jenkins spec. Here, spec has a containers, name of the container. Or instead of name first, can I give image first, name later? That doesn't matter, right? Name Jenkins container. Now let me give the image name. So this is the image name. So they are saying this image is deprecated. The image has been deprecated for last 2 years in the favor of this image. So they are recommending to use this image. What is the first Jenkins and what is the next Jenkins and what is this LTS? First one is registry. The first one is registry. Next one is what? Repository. Then tag. Right? They are asking us to use this one, this image. So this image, right? something like this. LTS. What is the meaning of LTS? Latest stable release. Latest stable release. It is not latest. They have explicitly given LTS. LTS in the sense latest stable release. So now I'm using this image and ports. What is the container port in case of Jenkins image? 8080. Now here Jenkins will have the jobs, configurations, all that information. So in that case, do I need to have a volumes used for Jenkins? Because without volumes, if the Jenkins pod is deleted and recreated, do we have all the jobs, whatever you have created in the Jenkins? Now, is it, we need to use values. In that case, we have two things. In the container level, volume mounts. In the container level, volume mounts, name. You can give some name, Jenkins val, something like this. Here. So mount path. Mount path. In case of Jenkins, which path I want to mount? Which path I want to mount? You can see the official documentation. Here, read documentation for usage. So what directory they are saying inside the container? Where they are maintaining the data? If you see here, this will store the workspace in, this will store the workspace in where underscore Jenkins underscore home. So this is value mounts. Next one, at the pod level, do I need to define my value? So values, name of the value, whatever is value mount name. Here I can directly use host path or I can directly use NFS, but instead of this, what is the recommended way to use values? I can say NFS or I can say host path. Instead of this, what is the recommended way? Persistent value. Here, can I use directly persistent value or I need to refer the claim? Persistent value, claim. Claim name. Claim name. What is your claim name? I will say something like this, Jenkins PVC. Now, since I am expecting some value, do I need to say what type of value? I mean to say what type of access mode, how much storage I need by defining this claim name, by defining this claim object. Do I need to create a PVC now? Just PVC. What kind of object now I want to create? Persistent value claim metadata name. So with what name I want to create PVC? In pod manifest, what is the claim name I am using? What is the claim name I am using? Yes, here N should be capital. This is the name, right? Here I am creating a PVC with that name. Now, specification. In PVC, you have what? Access modes, whatever access mode. read, write once. And also the storage, how much storage, resources and storage, something like this. So if you want to refer manifest, I am sharing the running notes, right? You can see that here itself. So in the while creating a PVC, right, you have to mention something like this: access mode, resources, request, all those stuff, how much you need, something like this. Suppose I need maybe 500 MB or 1 GB, something like this. And here I have not mentioned the storage class name. And since I have a storage class configured already, and that is marked as default, now do I get a PV automatically since I have a storage class configured? Then to access this Jenkins, what needs to be created? I want to access this Jenkins. What needs to be created? Service, kind, service, metadata, name, name of the service, whatever you want to give, Jenkins, SVC. I want to access outside. Then what type of service? Node port service. Ports, port. I can give 80 or 8080, whatever. Target port. What is my target port? My container port. Most importantly, the selector, app Jenkins. Now, if I want to isolate this application from other applications, can I create a namespace, separate namespace for Jenkins? Can I deploy all these Jenkins related Kubernetes objects in that namespace if I want to isolate, right? Yes. And also, can I set the resource request and limits also for this container? I mean to say, I want to set how much CPU, how much memory, minimum, maximum, all these things. Yes, right? You can do all those stuff. Now let me apply this hyphen dry run. First, I will do the dry run to validate. Is there any issue? No. Now, if you see, I have one PV, I have one PVC. This is used by another pod. This is used by database pod. This PVC is bounded with this PV. Now I am deploying a Jenkins application, Jenkins pod. For Jenkins pod also I need a value. So in my Jenkins manifest, I have a PVC. Now let me apply. Now I created a PVC. That PVC I am using in PV. Now I just created a PVC. Who created a PV, guys? Now I see again one more PV. One more PV. Who created this PV now? The storage class. The storage class. Now, since I have not mentioned in which namespace Jenkins has to be deployed, Jenkins is running in which namespace? The Jenkins pod. The default. Now, this is the service port. This is the service port for Jenkins 31635. Let me access this one from outside. Open the port, AWS security group. Guys, the more you practice, the more you understand the concept. If you just attend the classes, sorry, if you just attend the classes, you, while I am explaining, you can, and you feel that okay, I am understanding, I am able to understand how it works. You can remember for maybe 1 week, 10 days. If you are too good, right, your IQ is too good, then you can remember for 1 month without practice. But if you practice, you will understand more, right? I really appreciate at least you are attending 40%, 40 people are attending. I really appreciate you. But even, right, if you practice more, then it will be good for you. But with few others, it is a different case. They are not at all attending. That is up to them. Okay. Now, let's see. Let me access on that port. Did I open or no? Security group. I opened 31635. 1 second. It is running. 31635 is the port. Okay. Why there is no endpoints? Why there is no endpoints for this service? Let's see. Hyphen hyphen show hyphen labels app Jenkins selector app Jenkins. App is Jenkins. It is correct only. App Jenkins. Selector also app Jenkins, but still why? Let me do one thing. Let me go inside this pod. If I have a bash, maybe we deploy a lot of applications. That might be also one of the reasons. One second, it is not at all responding. It is not responding. That is the problem, guys. Do you see what is the problem now? What is the problem now? Why it is not responding? Because the pod is scheduled in that node. That pod is scheduled in that node, in that 171 node. That node went down. That node is not ready because how many pods it has scheduled in that node? If you see, 4. And that is 3 pods. I think 3 pods or 4 pods, 3 pods in the default namespace itself. And that node is having very less capacity. That's why it has scheduled. So that is why it is recommended to use in your pod manifest. In your pod manifest, it is recommended to use what? That resource request and limits. If I use resource request and limits, does Kubernetes knows already how many, how much resources are used for your pods in that node? Will it able to schedule? First of all, will it schedule if the resources are not available? If I mention that resource request and limits in our pod manifest. So do you get into these kind of issues if you use that resource request and limits? That is why in the real time it is recommended to use resource request and limits. So if I use resource request and limits for all my pods, Kubernetes knows how much resources are already utilized in that node, and it will not schedule, first of all, if there are no resources available. So now let me fix this problem. Let me delete this. I'll delete other application, only that Spring Boot application. Now let me restart this node, that whatever node went down. Whatever node went down. Which node went down? This one. So that's why when you are practicing, right, don't deploy too many applications, too many pods. If you want to deploy a lot of application, make sure instead of using T2.micro as a worker machine, you use T2.medium or T2.large, right? If you are using T2.micro, so do we generally restart our servers or restart Kubernetes service? What? No, how do you restart your Kubernetes service? I mean to say your kubelet you are talking about? Kubelet service. First of all, to restart the kubelet service, am I able to SSH to that node? Basically, if there is any issue, kubelet will go down. But if I want to start the kubelet, first of all, am I able to SSH now to that node? It is not responding at all. That's why I'm restarting the server itself. So now let's wait for some time. You press Control C, right? Unless until that node comes up, right? It will be showing in terminating state only. Unless until that node comes up, it will show in the terminating state only. The other one also went down. Do you guys understand why this also went down? Now why it is showing here these spots? Since that node stopped working, whatever pods were running in that node, 171 node, what Kubernetes has done? Whatever pods which was running in that 171 node, it has rescheduled to another node. Again, all the pods got rescheduled to this node. Again, this node doesn't have that much capacity. So that's why what happened? That's why this node also crashed. I mean to say it is stopped working. I need to restart this one also now. So unnecessary time waste. I should have deleted and applied. You no need to uncardon, right? Because I have already deleted. I already deleted, right? So the moment the node start responding, the parts will be deleted. The moment the node start responding to the master, the parts will be deleted because I deleted, right? You no need to mark that uncarded. Maybe I need to completely stop and start. Why? Okay, it's a time waste. Otherwise, I'll start taking very high configuration servers. Yeah, it is good for you troubleshooting, right? You will face these kind of issues in real time, guys, right? So that you can understand how to troubleshoot that issue. Let me start it back. Abdul is asking uncardon. You attended in the previous batch. You should be able to explain what is cardon, what is uncardon, right? We discussed in the scheduling. So you are attending for the second time. You should not have asked this question if you attended in the last time, right? Did we discussed in the scheduling? What is cardon, what is uncardon, what is taint, what is tolerations? Wait for some time. Maybe if you are not sure, right? We will discuss in the scheduling. Cardon and uncardon also we discussed. So let's wait. I thought of explaining stateful set today, but this is stopping me to continue. Now by this time, one node might have been responded. This is already in ready state. Now Jenkins pod is at least running in that node. Only one pod, right? So in this 171 node, it is running. This will be deleted in some time. This will be terminated in some time. Now this is also stopped. Let me start. Now let's see. kubectl describe. SVC, this Jenkins SVC. Now I have an endpoint. I should be able to access the Jenkins pod. Now this is my Jenkins. Now how can I get this password? Where do I have this password? Is it part of my server file system or is it part of my container file system? How can I get the password? The password is in this location. So what command I can use? What command I can use to get this, the content? Cat on what? Cat on my server. Now it is not Docker, right? It is not Docker anymore. kubectl exec, my pod name. What command I want to execute? Cat command on this path. So this is my password, initial password. I can do whatever I want to do. Now I'm running this as a pod. Now whatever configurations I do, right, and whatever jobs I create, since I'm using volume, even though Jenkins pod is deleted and recreated, will I have those configurations jobs? Will it have the state again, whatever pod? If I don't use volumes, then no. So do you understand the importance of volumes in Docker or Kubernetes, whatever it is? So volumes are not backups. Volumes are not backups. Volumes are basically mounts. You are mounting storage with your containers, your pods. So now all the pods are, I have only one pod deployed and all the nodes are in ready state. Okay. Is everyone is clear about what is volume, what is persistent volume, what is persistent volume claim, what is access modes, what is claim policies, and what is storage class? This is very, very important days. That's why I took almost 3 days. Right? Do we create service account role binding? Yes. Based on the requirement, yes, we will create a service account role bindings also based on the requirement. For my application, unless until my application needs to talk to the Kubernetes API, I don't need a service account and role. But your application itself, programmatically, it has to manage Kubernetes objects. Then you need to create a role binding and all that is based on the requirement. We'll discuss what is RBAC in the separate session. Okay. Now let's understand stateful set. I'll come to the config maps and secret later. We have one more Kubernetes object called stateful set. What is stateful set? How different it is from the deployments? As I already told, deployments are useful for what type of applications? Deployments are usually used for what type of applications? Stateless applications. But however, even though I am using a deployment, can I maintain the state of the deployment by attaching a volumes? However, even though I am using a deployment, can I maintain the state of the deployment by attaching the volumes? Yes. You can save the state of the deployment by attaching a value and you can make it stateful. But all the parts of the deployments will be sharing the same value. Suppose I created a deployment with the 3 replicas, 3 parts. Will I get a 3 different values for the deployment or same value will be used by all the 3 parts for the deployment? Same value. But sometimes you have a different use cases, right? I want to deploy 3 pods, but each pod should have its own value. In that case, the deployment will work in that way. Each pod should have its own storage, its own value. In that case, will that work? If I use deployment, will I get a different values for each part of a deployment, or same volume, same storage? Same storage, right? In case of deployment, same value. So all the parts of the deployment will be sharing the same value, and data across all of the parts will be same. But you have some requirements, right? Each part should have its own storage. In that case, stateful set does that. So stateful set is a Kubernetes resource used to manage what type of applications? Stateful set is used to manage stateful applications. Okay. Stateful set is used to manage stateful applications. Stateful set is also controller. It is also a controller, like the way we have a deployment. Stateful set is also a controller. So if I create a stateful set will create the pods. If the pod goes down, will the stateful set recreate the pods? Yes. But how different it is from deployment is basically, right? It doesn't create a replica set. Stateful set, when I'm creating a deployment internally is it creating a replica set? Yes. But stateful set will not create a replica set, rather it will manage the pods itself. Stateful set itself will manage the pods. So tomorrow we'll continue, guys. So it's already 7:28. I'll continue on stateful set tomorrow. Okay, we'll discuss stateful set and config maps and secrets tomorrow. Okay. Thank you, guys. Whatever we discussed, try to practice. We'll continue tomorrow on the stateful set. Okay. Practice is very important. Make sure you are practicing whatever we are discussing. Okay. Thank you, guys. I'll stop the session for today. We'll continue tomorrow on the stateful set. I am going to share the running notes and try to practice, and also try to do on your own some applications. Okay. Thank you.